over to, I will go ahead and turn it over to you or to Lauren.
Yes, I'll quickly turn it over to Lauren Driscoll, Director of Community Development Services, and Marty Sugart with RDG. This is the fourth installment, I believe, of Housing Study Conversation with RDG. So, Lauren, take it away.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, Commissioners. Excited to have Marty here in person. We're going to go over, this is really our last study session style meeting. We're going to go over what we're proposing as the framework for the policy, and then our anticipation is Marty will be back in 4 weeks under, or an item will be on for action, and that would be the draft policy along with what we intend to be an addendum to the Live Salina plan. So we're not getting rid of the 2016 one, but we will have a 2021 addendum that goes in the back. So those are the deliverables that we would anticipate in 4 weeks. But today, it's getting that framework, making sure we're all on the same page so we can go forth and create those deliverables. Marty and I were just kind of talking over lunch and thought it worth sharing this anecdote. I promise I already checked with Eric and Mitch to see if they had punked me, but Dean and I were walking in the building the other day, and this guy's working on one of the construction crews out in the parking lot, and he says, excuse me, yeah? You know, I really kind of like this town. We've been doing some work here. Where would I get a house? You know, where do I start? I think we're going to rent. So Dean's looking at me. He's like, of all the people walking in this building right now, okay. And I kind of, well, can you tell me a little bit more about what you're looking for? He's like, well, we're doing some construction here. I live in McPherson. My wife's ready to have a baby. We just really like your town. Do you have any recommendations on neighborhood? Maybe who we'd start to talk to about housing? That's how real this is, though. That we have invested in quality of life things, and they are showing up. You know, streetscape may not seem, you know, when we look at the bills and we look at the politics of getting through that, but it's there and everybody sees it and they can feel that quality of life. And that's what makes people ask somebody in a parking lot at 8 o'clock in the morning, I really like it here, how do I get a house? And I just want to share that with you because one, it's just so crazy random. And two, that is what all this is about, these conversations with Marty and updating this plan and asking ourselves, how do we invest in this? Because we have people who want to come here, and we want to make sure we've got a spot for them. So with that, I'm going to give you over to Marty Schuker. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Lauren. I can't tell you how nice it is to be here in person rather than on a computer. It's great. It would be nice without these, but that's how it goes right now.
We're getting closer.
Things are getting better, but in any case, it's really good to be here, and we're really excited to present the fourth in this series of times together. I did have a chance to view the strategic planning workshop, which was incredibly helpful and a very thoughtful and complete conversation. So I was sitting there working on this and listening, not to music but to the workshop, which was very, very helpful. So I appreciate that and all the comments and thoughts and so forth. So what we're going to do today is to present the strategy, the directions that we think that can help get us to where we ultimately want to go, which is number one, which really can be boiled down into two specific areas. Number one is how do we meet the demand for housing in Salina, and number two, how do we strengthen neighborhoods in Salina? They're really two dimensions of the same overall problem, and it is no accident that housing and community development are often related to one another, and in Salina that has been particularly crystallized by the old greenfield versus infill argument. The ultimate goal is to have productive markets in both of those. So that's what we'll be talking about today with as you can see from your packets, a lot of examples and different ideas to move forward in. So if we could have the next slide. Thank you. So we are suggesting essentially a three-phase strategy that will take us both in the immediate term and then well into the future. And it's kind of an odd strategy because in a way it begins at the edge and works in. When we were talking this morning with people from the Salina Condo, usually you think about an organization doing very small projects and then expanding to larger ones. In a certain sense, a strategy for something like the Condo, for a nonprofit community development organization, is to begin with something relatively big that's credibility and finance building, and then proceed downward to the individual, to the much more difficult problem of true neighborhood development, and that in Salina is almost somewhat harder than getting new stuff built. So you'll see that kind of a almost inverted triangle reflected in this strategy. So here you see what I think are the three big elements of the strategy. We have an immediate problem, and the immediate problem is to accommodate our demonstrated and increasingly critical need for new housing, to accommodate new employees, and to satisfy build-up demand that's taken place in our market over the last 10 years. But at the same time, build the capacity to look at the longer-term elements, and that is, how do we revitalize neighborhoods? How do we get infill moving on an effective basis? How do we build a market that works effectively in all parts of the city? So our immediate task are those two things. Number one, the immediate problem of evaluating RHIDs and other development applications and meeting the need for housing, much of which is going to take place on adjacent sites on the I wouldn't say the edge of the city, but in newer areas, while at the same time building the capacity to start taking on the key problem and the key opportunity of revitalizing neighborhoods in the what we'll call the established city. As we move into the medium term, our task then becomes focusing much more on home ownership than on rental production. Rental production, particularly in the realm of new employees, is going to be the immediate term problem, and a good deal of the focus in our presentation this afternoon is going to be on those issues. Why? Because generally new recruits are not going to buy houses immediately or at least new employees aren't, that they're going to look for a place to transition, to check things out, to bring their families in and get settled. Eventually, they will become more and more vetted in the community and will ultimately transition into ownership. And that isn't to say that we don't look significantly at ownership housing in the immediate term, but there'll eventually be more of a transition as we as the I wouldn't say onslaught, but influx of new jobs are accommodated in town, and people then want to build equity in the community. In the medium term, we also are suggesting what we call a neighborhood fortification strategy. Fortification being to establish the strength and credibility, forte being based on the Latin word for strength, of course, to increase the ultimate success of infill development within established neighborhoods. Our long-term objective then becomes building reinvestment within the city center, not just in the public or the nonprofit market, but in the private market, to create a self-sustaining market, and then to continue to provide assistance where we need to do it at the margins, but as we build credibility and strength, the need for subsidy dollars will tend to decrease project by project, and the ability to accomplish more good with fewer dollars will also increase. So that's kind of the overall long-term strategy, a threefold strategy that first of all starts out with getting the housing that we need to have built immediately built, which focuses very much on housing policy and the issue of how do you evaluate proposals, as well as creating the organizational infrastructure to move forward into the into neighborhoods and into neighborhood projects. In the medium term, to help the employees who are moving into town become homeowners, to accommodate our existing markets as well, and to begin the process strategically of fortifying our neighborhoods. And then finally, in the long term, to do those things that we need to do to realize a self-sustaining market in all parts of the city. So next slide. You'll see 3 slides here that really kind of deal with the same thing. So to summarize, now provide housing for our expected growth. In the medium term, to provide a effective structure that fills gaps on a continuing basis and eases the transition to home ownership and equity in the community. In the long term, to have a stable and self-sustaining housing market throughout the city. The techniques or directions that we then suggest for each one of those is that in the now phase, in the immediate phase, to develop a system that evaluates applications. And so that's something that we'll be presenting to you today, or explaining what you've already seen. To do a demonstration development, probably, well, through the CHODO, that can show some directions in the market, particularly a focus on things that are not currently being built, to develop the organizational infrastructure and financing structure to help us reach phase 2, where we can begin to make the reinvestments that are necessary in the established parts of the city. And understanding that we're probably going to have a real focus on rental development, which is where the biggest deficit appears to be right now, but eventually that's going to shift to affordable home ownership in our medium phases. In our medium phase, from a program point of view, we will be putting the infrastructure that we have developed in the initial phase into operation to complete projects, to expand private involvement in new markets, and to shift our emphasis to owner occupancy, and hopefully leading logically to a third long-term perspective where we have self-sustaining markets in both greenfield and infill areas, as well as a significant level of neighborhood reinvestment. So you can see that, as we often say in neighborhood development, neighborhoods did not change and in some cases decline or experience disinvestment overnight. It happened over time. And the process of revitalization and reinvestment is also a slow one, and one that should be done in both an effective way and in a sensitive way in terms of recognizing the needs and perspectives of the people who are in neighborhoods. Another interesting thing about demographically about existing neighborhoods is that existing neighborhoods tend to be aging, and there will be ownership transitions taking place, and it's important in order to preserve housing stock that we're on the right side of those ownership transitions, that they wind up going through a program that preserves and improves and upgrades that housing stock as our affordable supply. And that is another very important place where the organizational and financial structure of a housing partnership led by a CHODO comes into play. So next slide. So in terms of where we go from a policy point of view in these three phases, and again, I apologize because I was thinking this through as I was writing it at the same time, and apologize. I apologize if there's repetition here, but number one, in the immediate term, to establish an evaluation structure that responds to your perceptions of the important factors that we need to encourage in the structure and to evaluate programs effectively and objectively, to develop what we've called a quick win project, a demonstration that we have high level of confidence will succeed, but involves a new demonstration and some transformation of expectations. Also to involve employers, which will be an important thing, and to begin the process of developing the organizational and financial infrastructure that we need to move forward. In the 3 to 8 year period, to prove that new products work, to implement the financial structure, the development infrastructure, and begin to fill those gaps in the market, and to do interesting and strategic projects that strengthen our neighborhoods in an 8 year period and beyond, to achieve a self-sustaining housing market and to be able to address both infill and new greenfield development needs, and very importantly to recognize that those are going to happen at both ends of the scale. So next slide, let's talk first of all about the now, the immediate term. So when we look at each of these elements, here we have taken the program objectives, the program criteria, and just included some comments based on each one of these. So when we think about the new workforce and the immediate demand, the issues that we have now in terms of very low rental supply and so forth, our focus is to focus now on evaluation of rental projects, to create an evaluation structure, to use those programs that we now have access to, which are essentially RHIDs, the NRP, the IRBs, fee structures, and other kinds of things that we have within our control now, and to provide a financing and evaluation structure that will that will meet the city's objectives. To quick win project by finding and developing with a mixture of housing densities and products, a demonstration project that can indicate how a comprehensively planned program can meet a variety of different needs, to involve our employers in who have a significant interest in employee recruitment and retention, and finally to begin the organizational process. So next slide. This chart shows the list of priorities for evaluation that you worked out at the retreat. So and this was very helpful in terms of how we put together an idea for an evaluation structure. So top priority by far was get it done, was rate of development. Significant second place finisher was don't ask for front-end money, pay as you go. And then other various factors got somewhat lower ratings. What this said to us is in terms of translating this into a priority setting and evaluation structure, was if you can't build it soon and you're expecting a big front-end subsidy from us, forget it. those are going to be deal killers as far as qualifying for further consideration goes. The other things become sort of discretionary factors. So not any one project will be perfect, but projects that accomplish, that meet the first 2 or 3 criteria and then are able to move forward are then evaluated in terms of variables. How much assistance, how long does the assistance run? So it really becomes something of a 2-step process. And that idea really came very strongly out of the retreat, and at least my interpretation of what I was hearing over the computer. And I think it's a solid approach. So the scheme that we will show you is an idea. You might take a few days or a week or so to evaluate whether there's something missing or something that ought to be included, that might be a priority that isn't reflected there. But I think that as a framework, it becomes a very sound way to evaluate these projects. So before we go into that, any questions or comments so far? Well, I stop for breath so I can breathe through this thing. Yeah. Yes.
Mark, you were
Yes, Mr.
referring
Davis.
to the capacity that will support infill development. Can you expand on what that capacity includes?
Yeah. We will need, it's a very good question. We will need to build what I call an organizational infrastructure. We've got the beginning of that with the Chodo. We will need a predictable method of financially supporting those projects, particularly in this very critical medium-term range. So in the next couple of years, that's not something that can happen overnight. It's not as quick as approving a development application. So that involves a couple of different things. Number one is creating a Chodo that has sustainable capacity. So right now, there is a very, very able and capable interim director who is basically who's a great guy, but he's been and would be a wonderful permanent director, but that's not within his long-term plans. So there is the immediate issue of how do you organize and staff such an organization. That's going to require some funding until it becomes self-sustaining. So it takes some front-end work to get that done and to build that expertise. Because right now the Chodo is really much more a volunteer body than in a way than it is a development capability.
Marty,
Yes.
do we have somewhere in here where we'll discuss funding the Chodo
Yes.
and those type here in the, okay.
Yep, coming.
Get
Yep, that will come. Now, there's a lot of stuff in here,
Yeah.
but number 2 will be capitalization. So the Chodo has got to have a source of money to put into projects. And again, that is not money that should be seen as charitable contributions, but it's working capital that has to be built up, which then helps to provide the kind of basic equity that's needed to move forward. That program then becomes very much focused on the established city, and so again, because we can't go from 0 to 60 right away. It's really the neighborhood improvement capacity that takes a little bit longer to develop and to implement.
Given the expressed concern about pay-as-you-go, how does that work with the Chodo? I mean, do you think that there's infrastructure money out there from the federal government that could be requested and used to fund the Chodo? I'm wondering, I'm seeing the biggest obstacle for our well-staffed Chodo is they need money.
Yeah,
So where's the
it's
money?
going to take a community effort. And successful Chodos or CDCs really get going as a result of not necessarily public funding, but public-private funding of getting them going. So if we think about the ability of the private and public sectors in the city of Salina to organize and I'm talking about major industries, employers, lending institutions, charitable contributions, and so forth. That's kind of where that goes. Obviously, staff is not. Staff expenditures, especially in the front end, are not going to be recoverable through anything like sale of houses. And without knowing exactly what will happen with infrastructure, I don't think you can really depend on that either. It's going to be community related.
I have one more question that moves away from that. When you mention the efficacy of new products, are you talking about housing styles there?
Yes.
Or financing methods, or, so
Yeah.
it's what the
Really
public
more-
will accept
really
in the
more
way of
new-
differentiated housing?
Yeah, it's really more new types of housing markets for, as we've talked about before, that people would love a 10,000 square foot lot and pay $150,000 for a house, but it's not going to happen in this or probably any foreseeable future market. So one of the interesting points will be think about an initial Chodo project in the immediate term as being an experiment, as having a number of different kinds of products that we know can work and have demonstrated markets in other areas, but not necessarily in Salina, and demonstrate the effectiveness of those kinds of housing types. So yes, we're not really talking about financial products so much, although in a lot of cases a financing consortium can move into insuring loans or blended mortgages, but it's really much more different types of housing, different types of ownership, different sort of regimes like that.
Thank you.
So do you see the Chodo as being really the driver for infill development, or are there
Initially.
other, so you don't see, like, are there other options, I guess I'm asking, in terms of, getting developers or getting groups
Yeah.
to look at infill development?
Absolutely. And I think that the Chodo will, being a nonprofit that does not have to generate capital other than to support itself, it will be the pioneer. It doesn't mean that that a development proposal or development idea from private developer isn't considered. And in fact, the financing consortium that we're going to suggest will have probably its strongest relationship to the Chodo, at least initially, but also will have the ability to finance in different ways private development. That's one of the virtues of local control, that it's not federally funded, it's not a block grant program. It has the ability to move in different directions depending upon the opportunities that present themselves.
Gotcha.
And really, when we come to established neighborhoods, private reinvestment is the last thing we want to discourage. We really want to make that happen. And ultimately, the idea of ongoing development should increasingly transfer from a nonprofit to the regular for-profit market.
Gotcha.
We are in a
Warren.
study session, so.
Yeah, absolutely.
no,
Sorry,
please.
I didn't see you waving over there, sorry.
But what I would add too is we have
You
seen
wanna
where.
step to the mic?
It
Sorry.
depends on the state you're in. Sometimes they're Chodos, sometimes they're CDCs. HUD uses those names fairly interchangeably. We have a Chodo, community housing development
Right,
organization, but any type of nonprofit who wants to do something like this, sometimes they're just the entity that's running some of the infill programs too. Sometimes it's not always the best to have that running through the city as a program, is that you could build that capacity, and maybe they do a flipping program, and maybe they do a grant that does roofs, windows, and HVAC, and maybe they do a program that does this. So for us, as we go through this, maybe that's something we look at, is those types of programs. I will tell you too, just because we're talking Chodo, is one of the reasons Gary and Andy are here is Marty spent the morning with the Chodo. They've hired him as a consultant to help look at potentially doing a demonstration project with the goal of creating enough revenue to be able to do infill development. And so that is definitely part of trying to kind of work through that long-term vision and trying to find some of that funding besides just a flat-out public source or some of that flat-out capital we've seen come from other places.
Gotcha. And just a couple of things real quick, because I know we've got a lot of material to go through, but talking about infill development, a lot of times, I mean, one of the things that we listed on our evaluation policy or priorities is scale. And obviously, you're not going to get the same kind of scale if someone's able to do a small development of
Right.
duplexes or townhomes or a small apartment building as you are in a greenfield. So, I understand that from the point list, there's different points given to infill development, et cetera, but how do we make smaller developers aware that there are programs like the RHID that don't necessarily need to just be used on something that produces 100 units, but could be used for land acquisition within the core to get started on a project like that?
Yeah, that's why scale is not, well, it is in the short term kind of a
Right.
key qualifier, because you've got that immediate problem of trying to produce a fairly
Volume.
large amount of housing. Generally, the RHIDs don't adapt very well to very small projects because of all the work, including a development plan and state approvals and so forth, that all the hoops you have to go through to get to that point. So at least in the short term, our thinking is that they're probably, and I think this is a practical matter just in terms of how those projects go together, the 50 units is kind of a minimum size project. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't change that. So over time, when the need for volume is not so critical, and you might want to encourage smaller projects or a different scale, that can be changed. But right now, our recommendation, at least recommendation for your consideration, is that size is probably a pretty important factor right now. And then we have an opportunity as we move down the line and the immediate priorities are met to be a little bit more surgical and a little bit more able to consider smaller deals. That's why it's, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's sort of, the whole thing is sort of like an upside down triangle that in the short term we're trying to produce as much as we can, and then as we get later on down the process, we start to get a lot more focused on individual or small type projects.
Well, I think we've talked a little bit too about we're going to have to, over the long term, kind of keep revisiting this. And Marty's kind of taken
That's right.
what we talked about as kind of 2 5-year windows, and now we're looking at 3 sets of
Right.
3-year windows. And maybe, and I've been trying to kind of figure out is, do we do this annually or biannually? Maybe every 3 years we just pick the housing policy up, double check our numbers, see where we're at, and see is it time to maybe adjust that. And this kind of sets a nice duration to go, okay, we're really supposed to be, we should have gotten the bulk of our numbers. Now we're trying to kind of find, make this a more finite picture. We're supposed to be doing more into infill. Then, maybe our incentives change a little, where we're prioritizing rather than, scale or speed, it's maybe location.
And I think that also gives you an opportunity to address a concern that was raised earlier about, are we setting a long-term precedent? we're kind of breaking this into time segments and priorities, and as we accomplish that initial goal, we reassess and reset.
And if that's something important to you guys, we can literally write that into the policy, that this
Right.
policy shall be revisited every 3 years for you to take that action.
Yeah,
think that would be appropriate.
this is sort of an ugly analogy, but the immediate term is sort of like being in first gear. Then the medium term is sort of like being in second gear, that the car is rolling and it doesn't, the effort changes, it's still pretty significant. And then the longer term policy is being in third gear, things are rolling and it doesn't take too much gas to speed it up. So, yeah, like any other sort of stupid analogy, it's an oversimplification, but that's kind of the general philosophy here.
Thank you.
So what do we do in the short term? Well, this is the idea in this decision tree, as I mentioned, is to say there are certain qualifiers that are kind of non-negotiable that you have to meet to move forward. And then once we get to that level, then there are a variety of criteria that we kind of evaluate on a yes or no basis. And the variable there becomes, number one, does the project meet enough of those to warrant funding? And number two, we give a longer term, that is a greater subsidy, if the project meets more of the criteria that we find desirable. And so I submitted an application, and there's a first level of evaluation with 4 points, at least in this framework. Number one is that the project has to be online within 3 years, otherwise it doesn't do us any good in a 3-year time period. Number two, the front-end financing must be privately placed or arranged so that the developer is not asking for money up front from the city. Number three, that and this was a consideration that was mentioned at the retreat, that the project fits within an acceptable profit limit, that as the numbers are evaluated, the developers are entitled to a profit, but not necessarily an excessive profit. And how we evaluate that is kind of an interesting problem, but we're talking at this level about conceptual things and not necessarily about the details. And number four, that we want a project that will generate a significant scale of development. So we're using 50 units. We had a discussion over this too, decided probably 50 is a good number in terms of being substantial enough to make a difference. If the project does not meet those 4 criteria, then it's disqualified. It isn't considered further. If it does, then we evaluate what the occupancy type is, ownership and rental. If it's an ownership project, we're suggesting here for discussion that the requirement should be for ownership projects a median projected price of units at $275,000 or below. Now keep in mind that the median means 50% or above that and 50% or below that. So and we use median rather than mean or an absolute number deliberately, because we do, number one, want to encourage mixed price points in a development rather than a sort of monoculture of one price. And number two, it does give the builder and developer a good deal of variation. So there's the possibility even of cross-subsidization, of building higher-end houses and more affordable houses, and making sure that we get the numbers right. We're less worried about the price point at the top than we are about providing an affordable supply at the lower level. For rental development, it's the same sort of thing. A median gross rent here that we have projected based on our first analysis in our first workshop of $1.25 a square foot. So again, this is not necessarily saying $800 or $1,000 or $1,500, but it's based on the size of the unit.
So, and then this chart, just to kind of bring this back to the conversations we've had, you know, we talked at strategic planning. We did kind of that dot exercise to kind of bring those things to the top. And we also, one of the things that you said was base it on these numbers that Marty's come up with. You know, use that as that kind of base criteria. So we know how many units we need to have of the different categories. And then we've looked at those median price points, knowing where in the market we need those. So it's using that data plus those things that you highlighted that you wanted to push forward. And this is just a really great picture of how we start to use that information to start to make decisions and how we create a policy in which we follow. And this is all up for grabs, hence why we don't have a draft policy. This is an opportunity for you guys to say, oh, that's not exactly how we intended it, or now that I see it put like that, or it would mean this, I'm seeing it differently.
Right. Okay, so now when we go into the, and we're going to test this against a couple of specific proposals, but now when we go into the next step, which is looking at criteria that are, that many of which were articulated by the commission, the commission members at the retreat, and others are things that I sort of dreamed up or think are important, that give us the opportunity of establishing points and weighting. So that gets into the issue that was discussed at the retreat of how do we weight how do we deal with the size of the unit versus the density of it? Which of those things is more important? Well, this gives us the opportunity to say we can deal with both of those at somewhat different levels, and I think it helps us objectify the criteria to a greater degree. So just to go through these quickly, if an ownership project is located in an NRP eligible area or it should be or an NHIA eligible area. This is this new program that basically says that pretty much everything
Established neighborhoods.
Yeah, and established neighborhoods, and most established neighborhoods.
It's being proposed by the feds right now, and it basically looks at the gap analysis for financing between existing housing stock and construction needed to renovate said housing stock, and the NHIA would help pay for the difference in that gap.
Yeah, and it's the area that has been calculated to be eligible with that is a little bit larger than the NRP area.
And we have that map later in the
Yeah, we have that map later in the presentation. Or another criteria, so that would be basically encouraging infill. So that might get double. That's another variable, so we can decide how many points to give each one of those things. That it produces a property value per acre of over $1 million. So that would be like if you have an acre of $1 million per acre. So if you have 4 houses that are $250,000 houses, that would qualify. If you have one house on an acre lot that generates $600,000 of valuation, that would not qualify. And that's kind of the issue here is that often things that look like they're really good deals in terms of yield aren't. That because from the perspective of density of value, a giant house on a 2-acre lot is not as good a revenue generator as 4 smaller houses or 8 smaller houses on that 2 or whatever units on that 2-acre lot. So
Just as a point of reference, Lauren, what do we usually get on an acre now? Is it 3 homes? If you're looking at the River Trail area, that?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty common. It kind of depends on the developer and what style house they're doing, but I would say that's pretty typical for workforce housing, kind of our median income.
yeah. Gross density above 4 DUs per acre, and this is interesting because it helps to define gross and net density. So gross density means includes streets and parks and other spaces. So if I develop a subdivision on 80 acres and I develop 320 units on that 80 acres, as an example, that would meet this criterion. Keep in mind, that means that the net density, that is the density of residential property when you take the streets and everything else out, is going to be something like 5 to 5.5 units per acre, which is going to equate to something more like a 7,000 square foot lot in a typical residential subdivision. So again, these are, they sound similar, but one of them is encouraging higher value, higher yield value on an acre of real estate. The other looks at gross density and moves a project more toward smaller lots or toward attached or other kinds of housing that will generate that. Not that it disqualifies anything else, but in this kind of a system, it doesn't get the points that would be awarded for complying with that.
And you would be including the land costs in the value of that house?
Yeah. Yes, correct. Yeah. Does it provide a new to market product, something that isn't usually built? So these might be attached units, townhomes, row houses, condominiums. Condominium is a weird term because it gets defined differently in different places, but we will have a specific definition for what that means. Is infrastructure available as opposed to having to be built new? Is there something unusual or interesting about the design quality or innovative about the design? That's a question that we would put to the proposer. What's cool or different or unusual about your design, and then evaluate whether it's unusual enough to warrant the point. Points if 50% or more of the units are priced below $225,000. If the project is not using available infrastructure, is it building pioneer infrastructure, that is a new extension that is useful to us in terms of backfilling? So in some cases, it might make sense for to use an RHID to build a piece of sewer that on a non-contiguous development because it's going to be backfilled and it's something that would have been a good investment anyway. Are there features in it that are walkable or bikeable? Does the project include rehabilitation or reuse of existing structures? So here we're encouraging a project that might involve an adaptive reuse or an aggregation of and rehabilitation of a group of houses. Is it infill rather than greenfield? Again, it's not disqualifying greenfield projects, but there's an incentive for infill. Is it proximate to parks and urban services? So example would be, is it along a trail or adjacent or near a school, within walking distance of a school, near a recreational facility and so forth? That's actually the next one. Access to parks, trails, or other public use amenities. Does it mix densities? Does it mix housing types, including incorporating rentals? So these are ideas that, and they may be, they're open to question. So we would recommend to you that you take a look at them, see if there's anything missing or a number that seems screwy or modification to be made. I think that the overall framework is pretty good, but the weighting and the actual wording and so forth of the criteria could change. And again, a lot of these are related to what I read both from the mayor's comments and thoughts, which I really appreciate, and also from the proceedings of the retreat.
Marty, is this something that you'd like us to get back to you on?
Yeah, very much so. Like,
Okay.
if
So I'm
you
just trying to
took a
put the
week or something on it, that would be
Do a
fine.
week, if we're trying
Yeah.
to come back in 4 weeks
Yeah.
with an
Yeah.
actual deliverable.
Right, and I'm going to keep a list here, but, if you're keeping a list of what we, the specific feedback that you'd like to receive from us, I would appreciate
Yeah.
confirming that with someone else.
I had a couple questions real quick on the gross density. In order to accomplish that, is it possible to have some, variances to our current building standards? We have it currently, in order to reach that, when you kind of look at row housing and stuff, I think of that. And so is that something where, I guess, as a governing body, we have to be willing to do in some cases?
We can always double check, but in all reality, our setbacks and our lot densities and stuff are pretty accepting of
pretty
these kinds of
good,
things.
yeah.
We just
Okay.
don't see them very often because it's not the product we typically build, but we've had people come in with concepts, right, through DRT or other things, and I'd say 90% of the time we can accommodate it.
Okay.
So I don't foresee that being our
Okay,
big
I mean,
thing.
that's a question, that one, and then the next one,
If I may, I think it may be more of an issue in existing neighborhoods where
Yeah.
if you want to try a new innovative product in an established neighborhood or adjoining an established neighborhood, and traditionally that meets with a lot of opposition and there's an expectation of just replicating what's already on the ground.
North Salina has a lot of substandard lot sizes and a
Right.
lot of varied lot sizes.
Right.
So it's really hard if you're trying to parcel them together. We may need to do a little replatting and things like that, but
the other thing, when you said available infrastructure, is that available infrastructure up to the development, not in the development? Okay, that's.
Yeah, so it doesn't require, an interceptor, or
Right.
it just requires a local extension. Right, exactly.
Okay.
well, and you'll kind of see in the scoring or the weighting. I think one of the things Marty and I both took away from the strategic planning was a priority for infill, but trying to find that balance between meeting demand. So this still, I think, is trying to weight that. If somebody's got that idea, cool, you're going to come to the top of the pile and getting that in there, but not necessarily saying no to some of the other things.
Right, and I guess I just, I have a little bit of concern about the 50 or more units or lots, because if we're talking about adaptive reuse, and I'm thinking specifically about the Lowell School development, that wouldn't meet this threshold, I don't believe, of 50 or more units, or even, like, I don't remember how many were in phase one of the Lee lofts, but some of those things, if we're just going to be like, nope, you've got 35 or you've got 40, and that's a hard stop, we're not even going to take a look at it. I think that might something, if we're then coming down here and, weighting includes rehabilitation and reuse of existing structures, we might need to be flexible
Or
a little
weight
bit.
that higher?
What's that?
Maybe we weight that higher. If it's a reuse of an existing structure, maybe it's 3
Or
something
you
like
use a
that.
different threshold for rehab,
Exactly.
Which would probably be the easiest, in fact, I think that's a
or
very good
either
idea.
set the number just a little bit lower. I'm not saying if
Yeah.
somebody comes to you with 4 units, it's the full court press and you're going to give it what you would to something that's got 100. But if it's an adaptive reuse of a building in the community, I'd like to see us err on the side of flexibility in case it doesn't reach that 50.
Yeah, and it was occurring to me
unit
too,
threshold.
that if somebody put together a deal of, say, 20 existing houses in North Salina and said, we're going to do a comprehensive rehabilitation of those, we definitely would not want to disqualify that
Right,
project.
right.
So, yeah, I think having a different standard for rehab would be a
Okay.
very good idea.
Cool.
There is one thing we could look at too is, if you want kind of like a clause, like for instance, in LIHTC, the low-income housing tax credit, when the state goes to score applications, they have kind of different application categories. One of them is unique projects. And those projects kind of come to the top of the list if they meet that criteria, and they generally try to fund those up to at least 2 of them. So maybe there is some kind of category that's just an utterly unique project, that if
Right.
it doesn't fit into this, but it meets kind of a core set of values or a purpose and intent that
Right.
you have, that can then come in front of you.
Right, and I don't know where we stand on St. John's Hospital, and I don't want to go down that road, right now, but I'm just,
Yep.
that would be the example of something that whether or not it produces 40 units or 100 units, it would definitely be of value.
Well, and maybe because there is a difference between the evaluation criteria for ownership and rental, because rental is the next slide, but maybe there's two lines that it's, greenfield developments, it's 50 or more units.
Right.
Infill developments, it's
That's what,
20,
that's what,
something like that. Make their own
That
line.
makes
yeah, that's what we're
That makes-
suggesting.
That
is
totally
that,
makes
yeah.
sense.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, and then the variable then becomes, you have to have a certain floor of points on this to qualify. But then the term of the RHID runs longer for a higher number of points. So it'll be interesting to kind of apply these to a couple of real-world examples and to calibrate these numbers. But I think that the length of the tax allocation, which is basically what I mean here, should be dependent upon the consistency of the project with the city's objectives and frankly, the difficulty of doing that project.
Right.
So, and this is an example too, when you saw the other RHID proposals or policies from other cities, some of them just had a flat out number, like always 15 or always 10.
Yeah.
Or this kind of gives some of that flexibility that you guys have been talking about based on these priorities. And we're using RHID as an example because that's what we've been talking about the most. But that final deliverable product of a policy is going to kind of encapture our overall purpose and intent in housing. And the first one in there is going to be RHID as a tool. But then as we use other tools, we're going to use these things you guys are talking about to kind of keep crafting them like we're doing with the RHID to really make sure it's working for what we intend them to do. So that's just trying to kind of put all these things together in a meaningful way so they work together and they do what we're hoping they do.
Yeah, and also to have some things that are I mean, there's some subjectivity obviously in these, but most of these criteria are things that you can say, yeah, you meet it, or no, you don't. And I think that's important because, I mean, the one that's arguable, I suppose, is unusual design quality, which is why I would have the developer say what's unusual about the project. Of which, well, it's just kind of a regular subdivision would probably not be one, or an encouragement to do something that we can't necessarily define, but is interesting and special. It might be a public space, a placemaking feature, a street light, some other characteristic that could make that particular project distinctive. A good plan, a plan that's interesting. So we have a slightly different list for rental projects for consideration. And so the density is a little bit different. The affordability levels obviously change because we're talking about rental units rather than owner-occupied units. So here, the location in NRP eligible area stays the same. Density above 20 units per acre some of our developments have been in like the 12 or 13 units per acre, but we've had some that have gotten much higher and have gone to the 20 unit per acre range. That here we're suggesting 50% or more of units have rents that are either below $800 a month or below $1 a square foot. 25% or more are family units with 3 or more bedrooms. This is something that's been really an acute shortage in most rental development around the country, that there's been nothing in the way of building larger units because there's sort of a presumption that, people are singles and something from 0 to 2 bedrooms is more attractive. But in our situation where we're attracting new employees and new families, the bigger units are going to be pretty important. Mixes, densities, and building types these are all pretty much the same. One that we added, though, or a couple that we added, is access to urban, community, and commercial services so that rental projects are not built without access to shopping, grocery stores, and so forth and so on, and includes a transition to ownership option. And that's something we'll talk about a little bit later. But it is conceivable, and was something we talked with the Chodo board about this morning, is the concept of rent to own, where units are built on a rental basis, but also have an ownership transition option. This applies largely to single-family type rentals that might be built with LIHTC, where you could, over time, accumulate enough equity is reserved, put away in an escrow, and you accumulate enough equity to make the down payment. Right now, one of the biggest issues in terms of first-time home buyers has been lack of down payment capital. So people can afford the payments, but they don't have any assets, mostly because the college they went to took all of those assets. But the ownership transition, I'm just kidding there, but depends where you went.
The Chodo, does the Chodo usually, because they're turning the same dollars, they usually don't own the properties, they usually rehab them
That's
and
right.
sell them.
Yeah.
So they would have to have substantially more dollars if they were going to do the rent to.
Yeah, these have to be
rent to own.
supported. Well, they're getting rental income,
True,
so.
but they're not getting that, yeah. It depends on how many
But
dollars.
they're not getting the money is not revolving as
Right.
fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's
So-
kind of an interesting bridge that we're starting to see, especially with housing markets being so hot. Down payments and cash are becoming such a big deal that even if you have the down payment, you didn't have the cash, or you've got the credit but you don't have the down payment, and the housing prices have gotten so high, there's no way you're going to ever be able to save the down payment. So more and more communities who are trying to get kind of that long-term investment home buyer, especially in that existing housing stock, is the way you do that is that rent-to-own scenario. So if that's something we're seeing, and I think there's nothing wrong about promoting that up front, but, in that kind of the 3-dot scenario that Marty's got, that's really definitely something that jives with dots 2 and 3.
Yeah.
Where when we start to look at infill, and we want to create neighborhood stability too, these rent-to-own programs have been very successful. So it would be a change for the Chodo for sure in looking at that, but I think it's one that's doable.
And I can't remember, it'd be something to check with the local lenders on. We have some of the first-time home buyer money that comes through Kansas Housing Resource Corp. And then also Federal Home Loan Bank. It'd be I can't remember whether, if you're renting the property, if there's already if there's a depending on how that is, if you're renting to purchase, I don't know if that still qualifies as a first-time home buyer. That'd be something to check on, because
Yeah.
they'd be
We do
building
have
up that
somebody-
equity. Not only would they build up that equity through rent, then they could still, if they could still qualify for the first-time home buyer money, would help also, so.
We do have somebody on the board who works in banking, and that didn't seem to be an issue, but that we will definitely follow
I
up
just
on that.
can't remember that.
Yeah, this has been a tremendously successful program in North Omaha, actually, that through a CDC, through Holy Name Housing Corporation. And it's interesting that a number of years ago, we seemed to be doing a cluster of housing studies in Michigan, and we would recommend rent-to-own projects. And there's a developer who was following us around from city to city and building them. They were not building them with low-income housing tax credits like Holy Name Housing Corporation did, but then they weren't constrained to the same sort of continuous occupancy that you're limited to in LIHTC projects.
Approximately how long do you see when these projects have gone? How many years does it take for them to go from rent to own?
We generally will figure about 5 years to build enough equity.
If it's LIHTC, though, it's 50.
If it's LIHTC, it's 50. If it's the same house, so what Holy Name did was kind of interesting. In the same neighborhood, they would build one house that was a low-income housing tax credit house and a basically identical house in the same neighborhood, and so the family could use the the equity built and buy another house that was very much like the one that they had been, quote, renting.
So do they take a percentage of that rent? They take a percentage of that rent and apply it to the,
Apply it to the purchase, right, exactly. That it gets escrowed and it goes into an account that can be used to buy another house.
interesting concept.
But
Yeah.
I hate to be the wet blanket, but we're halfway through our time. I don't think we're close to halfway through our slot.
Marty's going to have to talk faster. We're going to have to quit asking
We'll
questions,
speed
one
up.
of the
When
two.
we get to the pictures, we'll speed up. Yeah, by 4 o'clock, I'll suffocate on the mask anyway. It gets really wet in here, by the way, when you're talking. Yeah, this one is going into the washer right away. The one program that I did want to talk about a little bit that has been problematical, not just here, but in a lot of places, that is an available program, is the NRP, the Neighborhood Revitalization Program. And there's been a lot of discussion about why doesn't this program get used more, and how do we restructure it in a way? So it is, in theory, the NRP is a really good program. So it provides an incentive for making improvements to a home. It's relatively simple to do. It applies to there's no floor in terms of it being a small project. But it has one critical problem, and that is it's one of those incentives where you have to take away and then give it back. So in other words, if I say I live in North Salina and I decide to improve my kitchen, and I spend $20,000 on a kitchen improvement project, and I don't know how the assessor here operates, but if they're like assessors in most places, they're not going to increase that assessment on the house. They might a little bit if they know about it, but generally in a neighborhood with low housing values, they're not going to do that. Therefore, there's really no taxes to abate. There's no tax basis to abate. If they do make the reassessment and assess my house at $20,000 more, I get the added taxes back. But if they didn't reassess in the first place, I wouldn't have had to pay more in the I wouldn't be paying taxes to have to get the thing back, get the money back. And so people just don't see it as being, in general, to be a very effective
Where I see it being
technique.
effective is when you have a significantly dilapidated property that you take from 20 to 80,000
That's
or
right.
whatever. And I think I called Lauren on this the other day. We have a couple in town that started buying up properties, and so I sent them our NRP program, and I was surprised. I guess I hadn't looked at it in a while. There's a lot of neighborhoods I would have thought would fall into that don't.
That don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know a couple homes they had bought that they had done exactly what we talked about. They'd taken them from 20 to $60,000, $80,000, taking properties that were close to needing to be torn down, but they didn't qualify
Yeah.
because of the locations.
Yeah. So the point is that we have to rethink. It's a perfectly good idea. We've got to think about the reasons why it's not working and restructure that. Figure out how to make it work more effectively. And that is something that we will include in the housing policy. And hopefully it will work. There also have to be criteria for NRPU. So if you're say you're buying up a bunch of houses and you're doing kind of minor repair work to make them habitable again, and the value goes up, that's probably not the kind of action that we're trying to create an incentive for. So we're going to be taking a little bit more. We need to be taking a little bit closer look at that. But that program is not here, and in many places really living up to its potential.
Well, I think what Marty's trying to say with that last point is there's a big difference between getting one of those houses, putting a couple new windows in, and painting the front door and calling it good,
Right.
to like you foundation repairs were done, new roof is on, the things that it takes to really bring a house back to what is quality housing stock. And where do you incentivize? This is what's getting incentivized, because that's a slight margin, and if that's what you're doing, you don't really
Does
need an
our,
incentive.
does our program have a minimum like $10,000 investment, or is that my imagination?
Yeah, it's like 10,000 for
10,000.
residential, I think 20 for commercial.
Okay.
Okay, so that's to come. Next slide, please. So number 2 is the quick win demonstration. So the concept is to do something visible that's a new project that's different, not replicating what the private sector does, that will also generate some operating capital for the Chodo. So the project should be visible. It should demonstrate best practices to the degree that we can. It should build types of housing that were not necessarily they're not necessarily common in the current private market. And as I've mentioned here in the 4th point, it should really address what we call the missing middle, the stuff that we're really not building in terms of density or price point. So what do we need? Well, we need a good site with good access to services. So there are several interesting possibilities that we're looking at, and that involve, we think, available property. A developer with risk tolerance. That means that's where a nonprofit development corporation moves in. That's got community support. A means of financing, that's got to be arranged. A market-based program and development plan, that's got to be arranged. So our kind of supplemental agreement with the Chodo is to think through these issues and to put together effectively a physical development plan and a business plan to make something like this happen.
Well, and one of the reasons this got brought up is Marty came to us and said, when I look at other cities that kind of broke the log jam, we've talked about that, Mike's talked about that phrase, is particularly with rental housing, we have a log jam. And what we've been talking about for the last couple of meetings is that risk that developers have when they're looking at bringing a new product to our community. We pretty much build a certain type of single-family residential and a certain type of rentals, and we haven't built those kinds of rentals in a really long time. So how do you demonstrate that other products can be built here? How do you do that? You find a developer that's willing to take some risk, but has a different motive on reward. And so when we looked at other cities that had similar issues to ours, they were using a nonprofit developer. We happen to have one established. The Chodo wanted to be proactive about that. And I mean, if we get through this meeting and City Commission's like, nope, we don't see a demonstration project being necessary or something like that, I think we can address that. But to be proactive, when Marty brought this up, I said, you need to let the Chodo know. That this is something you're thinking, so they're not caught off guard that at the end of a Monday meeting, they find out that they're smack in the middle of step 2.
Crowned developer.
Yeah. And in a proactive way, the board has taken the initiative to set up, to hire Marty to do a feasibility analysis, to look to see what it would take to actually do this. And is using its very meager funds to do so because it thinks it can, and that this would be valuable and are willing to be a participant in this process. So they are aware, and hence why they're here, of their role in this if that's what we're hoping for from them.
Yeah, so next slide is just a piece of generic land, happens to be on Ohio Street. Yeah, one thing we don't have to worry about is too much topography in Salina, so that's one constraint that isn't a big problem. Next slide, Jacob. From a physical point of view, this is actually from the Broadway Boulevard study. If you recognize it, and it was a concept that was done along that street, but a diagram of what a physical development plan looks like, something that's going to give people an idea of scale and layout, and this particular project involves looking at a combination of attached and small lots detached housing. There might be a new feature. This is a drawing of a type of street that we call, well, we don't, the Dutch do, called a Woonerf, that's basically a mixed traffic, mixed pedestrian car street, where cars are slowed down to pedestrian speed, and it produces shared space. Not to say that we would ever do anything like this. It's done in Holland all the time, but as an experimental kind of infrastructure. Next slide.
Well, it's a good example, too, when we talk about uniqueness, right? You know, looking at a project that incorporates that much walkability or connectability would be very unique for us. And
Yeah.
so those are the kinds of things that might rise to the top of the pile.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing that says that streets have to be built with curb gutter, distinct sidewalks that we.
Well, there is. There's a code.
Well, there is, but we're going to blow that away.
Once you've done that, you can do some other streets.
Well, there is something that says that, but we can't. But these are concepts that are new to the United States, but they do work, and they can be really quite economical in terms of how they function. This is a great little demonstration project. This app is in a small town in Iowa called Macokota, and it's a pocket neighborhood called Bear River Cottages. Little homes built on a block. And next slide, please. And you can see how they're marketed. And this has been a very successful little project in this in this community. Backloaded garages and parking off the street, kind of an interior court that these are organized around, and it was done as a partnership with the Eastern Iowa Development Corporation.
Well, and these are a great example, too, of how we can mix new build in with infill.
That's right.
You know, these are definitely some smaller pieces. So whether you've got a larger project that you're doing this type of product mixed in with something else, or we happen to be able to get a bigger piece of property in an infill neighborhood, this is the kind of thing that could go there and really match the scale of an existing neighborhood.
A lot of our things have been kind of incentive-driven and incentive-focused. I mean, is that something that we need to take a look at too, in terms of a development like this? How do we adjust our codes? How can we make something like accessory dwelling units or whatever, be a possibility?
Accessory
So-
dwelling units, I know the Planning Commission's been talking about for a couple of years, and, if that's something you want Marty to put into the policy as, needs to be developed, I don't think that's going to be done in 4 weeks, but if
No.
that's an amendment we need to make, I think we could rally support around that for sure. But, for an example, this type of product, in general, our building codes could already address that. I
Yeah.
don't think there's dramatic changes. For instance, there was a product out of Wichita, if you've seen the articles, they're called micro mansions. We were asked to look at those to see, did they comply with our building codes, because they're a semi-prefab structure, and they did completely comply with our building codes, and that's a very small, compact home. So these cottage methods, we've also looked at cottages like this for when folks have come in about retirement communities and senior living, so we know our code could adopt to these.
Okay.
Yeah, those are very cool, by the way.
Yeah, they really exist. This is not
They really do exist.
They're in Iowa.
Yeah. Next slide. This project we've already shown you once, but these are semi-attached, single-family homes. Wonderful little project that is both contemporary. Notice all these things have porches on them. Porches are actually a pretty cheap amenity to put on a house. They really do sell. Next slide. So then, third item is greater employer involvement, and this too can be in different stages. The first thing that there are a couple of things that employers can really do to help production in the short term. Obviously, number one is meeting their projections for employment. That kind of, if they don't, then all bets are off. But we certainly hope that will happen. But the most significant thing in the short term is on rental projects is a commitment to rent or guarantee income on a certain number of housing units. That is something that can be done in cooperation with developers solely on the private market immediately, and can provide a good deal of surety to a developer if you know that in a rental project 10 or 15% of your units are going to be guaranteed for occupancy. Sort of cuts the risk down and cuts the vacancy rate down, and something that employers could do in the short term. Related to that is housing counseling for new and referrals for new employees moving to town, and in thinking about something like our Quick Win project, is participation as equity investors on an individual basis in either in ongoing projects or new projects. So participation in the financing mechanism for a Chodo-driven project, for example, would be an example of that. In the long term, there's a role for employers in kind of the longer-term organizational infrastructure. In the financial structure, there are cases where employers have banded together to form their own development company, their own housing development company. Whether that's necessary or not, I don't know, but it can be done. And to be an equity investor, again, not to lose money, but to return, provide a reasonable rate of return to development projects of interest to them. So next slide. We talked a little bit about St. Louis University, the projects that it has helped encourage in its formerly distressed area in St. Louis, Missouri, providing housing information and, in this case, financial incentives to people in the university community who are buying or leasing homes in the immediate neighborhood. In the longer term, next slide, in Sioux Center, Iowa, we talked about this as well. The employers formed a land development corporation which used their collective capital to build out about 70 homes in economy of scale. So they would build 5 houses and sell those, and then recycle that money and build 5 more. Finally, in the first phase, beginning and executing the process of setting up what we've called here housing partnership, and this is something we also recommended in the 2016 plan. So the double lines and triple lines represent strength of relationship. So the housing partnership includes, in addition to the city, which obviously is going to be involved in any case, is the Chodo and any other CDCs that might be established. That's probably doubtful, but it's conceivable that a church-related organization could form a CDC and operate within a specific area. We're not necessarily in competition with each other. A finance consortium whose strongest relationship initially would be with the CDC, but not necessarily exclusively with the CDC. And then also the private development sector, either through its own actions or in partnership with the Chodo. So a private there are many situations where a private developer on something like a low-income housing tax credit will become a limited partner or that equity investors become a limited partner with the Chodo, who's the general partner in a development corporation. The Chodo is a nonprofit, can't use the tax credits, but the equity investors or a private developer can. And so that kind of a relationship provides the benefits and priorities given to CHODOs in connection with low-income housing tax credit projects who have a special sort of get to the front of the line status, but can involve the private sector in these kinds of partnerships. So the organizational structure of that follows a couple of different points. From a financing point of view, it involves and welcomes capital participation by a number of agencies, lenders, and it's helpful in terms of meeting CRA requirements, private philanthropy, employers, corporations, the Economic Development Corporation, the public sector, even private individuals. We would envision it as providing a couple of financial assistance, direct or leveraged financing for the CHODO or other nonprofit development corporations. So it could provide primary project financing, interim financing, or even permanent financing to a nonprofit developer. We are very much like the idea of providing interim on projects that we want the private sector to be involved in. The advantage here is that a financial consortium can write non-recourse loans. It can reduce the risk for the private developer because it has the capability of being more patient in terms of payback on interim financing if the project doesn't fill up or it takes a while to market it and the developer views that as a high-risk project. It can provide gap financing. So if there's a deficit in the rents that a project can charge versus the rents that it has to pay to make the numbers work, that gap can be filled on a subordinated debt basis. It can help develop initial capitalization for the CHODO, and we suspect that as time goes on, this consortium will focus more on infill development as it grows and matures, in concert with the entire program here that we're outlining. It isn't necessary to have financing consortium provide money that can be provided by the normal private sector. We are here looking at higher risk areas, types of development that entail higher risk. So the whole idea of the financing organization, in addition to capitalization, is risk abatement, is trying to address that major disincentive to housing development. The development entity starts with the CHODO. The CHODO, and we're so happy to see that group active and reorganized because it's incredibly important, is where this process starts. It may expand. There may be other development corporations around a neighborhood or a local base that emerge. The development entity is capable of forming partnerships with private developers. I mentioned earlier the idea of it being a general partner with limited partnership equity investors who are able to use the tax credits. It has access to LIHTC, the MIH program, Moderate Income Housing Program of the state, CD and home funds. Probably when we get to the later stages of this process and everything goes swimmingly in terms of employment growth, Salina will become a CDBG entitlement. So that's something to think about in the future as you pass the 50,000 population mark. We think that this kind of entity should focus on unusual projects, sort of show the way for the private sector to be involved. And again, we think its initial area of focus will be a relatively interesting but relatively low-risk project, but it will shift to infill to that more difficult market as things develop. Okay, so number two, is the neighborhood fortification stage. So, yeah, next slide, and then the next slide after.
Real quick, Marty, before we get into this, I just want to remind the commission, I do sit on the Chodo Board of Directors. We've talked about this before, but I think this is a good time that as we're talking about the Chodo's involvement in the housing in Salina, that I very much recognize that if we choose to go forward in this direction and have them play this part, that I will need to pull away from the Chodo Board and not be a part of that in order to have that ethical separation. But we have not had this kind of relationship up to this point. So I just want the board to be aware, remind you that I'm aware of that. And if that's the direction we go, I very much understand the importance of that.
Thank you.
So okay, great, and that's a very good point. So as we think about neighborhood fortification of strengthening neighborhoods, the concept here is to build needed projects with a demonstrated demand on infill sites, designed to build value and credibility of established neighborhoods. This is a little bit of will be a little bit of a refinement of the beachhead idea that we had in the 2016 plan. I think the problem with that was that it sort of overreached, and its beachheads were a little bit too big and a little bit too, in some ways, monochromatic. So it wasn't necessarily focused on specific kinds of projects that had demonstrated demands. And I think that is the key to it. And you'll see what I mean as we get into this part of the program. The housing partnership for these kinds of projects, which involve significant immersion into established parts of the city, would be the main force that advances the concept. So again, in a way, these are demonstrations of markets and demonstrations of things that are specifically needed and highly marketable. What they are, we can suggest, and will suggest some ideas, but in the meantime, they're not things that are being built or assembled yet. The city does have a significant role in these areas, and that is to make capital investments that support the fortification effort. And by capital investments, this doesn't necessarily mean pouring money into housing projects, but doing things like neighborhood street rehabilitation, curbs and sidewalks, lighting, those kinds of things that can have an enormous effect in terms of encouraging reinvestment by property owners. And it is really a very proven to be a very effective tool in terms of addressing housing rehabilitation. It is important to create conditions for feasible private reinvestment. So these may be individual homeowners, it may be substantial developers. It might mean issues like eliminating, like improving code enforcement or eliminating blighting influences in neighborhoods that are really kind of dragging the whole area down.
Or it's those support type grant programs. You know, we've seen a lot
That's
of
right.
success in Topeka where they had a program really narrowed down: windows, roofs, and HVAC. It brought utilities down. It improved the exterior of the homes. It gave more cash in the home because they didn't literally have it going out the window or down the drain. And it improved the overall neighborhood look. I mean, those are definitely examples of fortification that if you've got people making investments, we're trying to narrow that gap. We're actually able to achieve that by also bringing up home values and bringing up quality of life.
Yeah, the important thing about those is that they're really envelope improvements that you know, in addition to making things look better, that they stabilize the exterior of the house so that it doesn't deteriorate. Because we can't build new housing for the cost, even we can't build new affordable housing at the cost that even a rehabilitated existing unit will acquisition, rehab, resale programs that are largely Chodo driven right now, although they can be less politely called home flipping, but we don't necessarily use that term, can be very effective, and really should ultimately be a significant part of this phase of the work. So here we get into to some of the types of projects that are focuses of this, that are things that we think have demonstrated impact and demand that can be real focuses for the work of the Chodo, both now to some degree, but certainly in phase 2. Affordable senior housing, something that is really limited and has a really significant demand. Equity building development like the rent ownership units that we were talking about a little bit earlier. Acquisition, rehab, resale, which is a very important element that the Chodo is beginning to get involved in. One thing that's kind of interesting is that really needs a construction capability. So right now it's very much a do-it-yourself operation, and again, to get that up to scale is going to require some ability to form a workforce or relationships with contractors. Infill mini subdivision, so taking a block or a block face or a half block or an available site and developing a cohesive project on a smaller scale in those neighborhoods. Combining housing and support services. One of the things that I think is a real opportunity for success is integrating new housing development with childcare. That childcare is a tremendously significant need, and we've talked about this both in Salina and around the country. And one thing that can be a real successful combination is combining housing development or infill development in an area with a child care facility with properly staffed. New housing forms like townhomes and auxiliary units, live-work environments, and finally adaptive reuse and historic preservation. So the city side, as we said earlier, really deals as much with infrastructure as anything. Street rehabilitation, sidewalk upgrades, streetscape lighting, placemaking, and finally making the NRP more successful. Next slide. So here's an example of this is a low-income housing tax credit funded senior project. This was done by a CDC again in Omaha, which I lived there. It's probably a place I show you more examples of than you wanted, but it's a really great little project that provides basically a community in a redevelopment area. Next slide is the Crown or Rent to Own program that we've talked about, and this is a description on the slide of how that works. Next slide. This is actually the site of a former, might sound a little familiar here, the site of a former hospital that was that closed and basically went into serious deterioration, was acquired by the city, and was cleared and replaced by a single-family owner-occupied subdivision, also developed by CDC. Next slide, a block of new infill homes around a school that has a high-quality child care center in the middle of it. So this has really been a major focus for the redevelopment of the surrounding neighborhood. Next slide. Redevelopment block of picking a block that has sufficient vacancy and housing deterioration, acquiring that and developing new housing along it. So we did the rendering below of the street above. It's actually in Excelsior Springs, Missouri. And a developer saw that and built it. This is actually a LIHTC project, low-income housing tax credit rental project with that you wouldn't be able to tell because it's all, again, these really lovely single-family houses. Next slide, infill townhomes, which can work well on sites. Whether they don't have to be sloped like this, but
Well, and these are kind of an example of what Brian Richardson did,
yeah.
one block off of Iron.
Yeah, so the concept of attacking gaps, this is the NHIA program that we talked about earlier. So you can see the area that under the statistics is eligible for that. So it's pretty much everything north of Crawford Street. And then that little tail is along the western side of the city down to Magnolia. So it's a little bit bigger area than the NRP area is, but could be a very effective program if it gets approved in the infrastructure package
Well, and it
or
might be-
by itself.
It might be even worth looking at this map if we're revising the
That's
NRP
right, exactly.
to match this more similarly, because this is what the feds have kind of looked at and said, if you're trying to get that gap in housing, here's where it's going to happen. Here's the census tracts and the other data that came up with that map.
Yeah, it isn't wildly different, but it's a little bit,
Makes
it's a
it
little
takes
bit
the
easier.
center. We missed
Yep.
4th Street and 8, there's some of those, yeah.
Yeah.
This makes a
Yeah.
lot more sense to me.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's just expanded just enough. And I think to really kind of get to that moderate level, some of the stuff that's covered in the NRA, it's what it takes to bring it up in value might not be worth somebody who maybe wants to start at a $50,000 home versus a $30,000 home in that rehab category.
So, and then finally, please excuse the Google photograph, but this is in Council Bluffs, Iowa, which is a city that's really used street reconstruction very effectively to generate reinvestment in what was once not a very strong neighborhood. Okay, so finally the results, and we get to the point in phase 3 where things start to support themselves. So the method behind the madness is to build enough value and enough security that we get to the point that the private sector begins to work with either minimum or no assistance. So a couple of examples of that kind of going on. This is this little project that's a totally privately funded project in DeSoto, Kansas, near downtown, called the Cottages. It's really, I haven't been there since it's been built, but I was there doing a housing study during construction. It's really a very nice little development. Private infill development, this is the one on the right, is in Fayetteville, Arkansas. And then the next slide, very importantly, and this is kind of where the rubber hits the road, is getting to the situation where people are reinvesting in their own houses and doing rehabilitation. And at this point, the amount of individual subsidy gets rather small, and we hope that and think that the private market begins to respond and ultimately things happen. The problem with housing programs is that the need is never fully satisfied. But the best thing we can do is to get to the point where people are able to build secure wealth in their homes and see those homes as valid investments for the future. So just quickly to review, next slide, that as we said when we talked last, we thought that an action program should build resources for both filling gaps in financial performance and in expediting the pipeline being not a good term to use right now in view of the Colonial Pipeline, but you know what I mean, of things that are lined up for development, to demonstrate a demand, that there is a demand for different housing types, to engage builders in developing those through our demonstrations, to reduce risk factors, to engage industries, to diversify the products that we offer, and to have an overall strategy that ultimately conserves and rehabilitates our existing inventory of housing. So the test then becomes, for us, in thinking about these ideas and moving forward, what should the city's focus be? Well, I think we've probably answered that question with the three-part strategy. How should resources be used and projects evaluated? How do we balance new development and conservation needs? We're very sensitive to this and listening to the retreat proceedings and of the need to balance both markets, both our infill and established city markets and needs, and our kind of a little bit easier to accomplish greenfield needs. What should a production structure look like? What kinds of resources are realistic? So hopefully we have addressed or will address these questions in both the policy and in the Live Salina amendment. And so our next step will be in 4 weeks to deliver the actual policy document draft to you, as well as the Live Salina amendment, because we're planning to be wrapped up with both of those things within that period, so that you can review those, again, modify and move forward.
Any questions for Mr. Schukert or Ms. Driscoll?
I do. In 4 weeks, we'll look at the policy. We have a couple of developments in front of us. Where do those stand between now and this? My concern is, one of the things we talked about was the rate of development. And if we wait 4 weeks and then we have to discuss those projects again, we're going to get to the point where we're going to get out far enough that we may not be getting things perhaps built in a significant time frame to meet the demand for employees coming to the community.
I don't think it was ever I don't think it was ever assumed by us that you wanted to wait
Okay.
for these,
Yeah.
for the housing policy. So
Because
we're in
the
development.
project's already advanced to,
Right.
Correct. You
I
passed
just
a
didn't want us to be
resolution.
sitting for 4 weeks, so.
No, no, I mean, we've sent the information to Department of Commerce.
Okay.
But
Meeting this week with our
that's
bond
not
counsel.
totally correct. We don't have a way to evaluate the projects or negotiate the terms of an agreement till we have the policy. Or have
No,
some,
you totally do. I mean, it's, if we didn't have a policy,
so without setting a precedent every time we do it again. I thought the plan was so that we didn't have to set 27 different precedents with 27 projects that come in front of us.
correct, you do not. I'm going to look at Mike and tell you out of turn, but I mean, that's all on you guys. You guys get to make that choice. If the choice is we want to act now on these two that we have, and we're just going to have to kind of tough our way through those because we don't have examples and we don't have a policy, that is definitely an option. And then going forward, if you adopt the policy that we're talking about 4 weeks from now, everything that came after that, you would look through the guise of the policy and have that type of criteria to go through.
Given
Yeah.
the criteria that you've given us today,
You
it's
could
in
do
my
it.
mind that both of the projects we have would qualify.
Yeah.
Clearly.
Yeah.
So I agree with Commissioner Hoppick that we need to move those two forward, because I think the delay will hurt the projects.
Well, and they have moved forward, so as per the process through state statute, you pass the resolution, those have gone to the Department of Commerce, they're awaiting Department of Commerce's approval. That gets us through the next hoop, and then the next stage would be the development agreement negotiation, so we are beginning to set up the timeline and the process for that, and following the, commerce and a development agreement being pulled together along with the required development plan as per state statute, we would then bring those items in front of you.
And to elaborate on Lauren's prior comment, and I agree with her characterization, I appreciate the it makes it easier to have a policy in place to then score it and it passes or fails, but that's not a required element. You have considerable discretion as a governing body.
Right.
Request by request, project by project, and then additionally, more often than not, decision setting a precedent, and so that's completely understandable as well. But more so than ever, we've had conversations about this is kind of an ever-changing landscape and not wanting to set a precedent. The combination of making that clear in the front end as well as adopting a policy shortly thereafter, I think if you as a governing body are comfortable collectively of proceeding, there's nothing that prevents you from doing that.
And one of the things I brought up last time is I would like to see us, again, continue to use Marty as we address these two projects to help us. You know, we looked at return on investment and some different things. I think there's some things that Marty can help us with, you know, even until we get that policy in place and kind of give us some guidance based on our need and what's being brought to us. And I think you've stated that you'd be willing to help us with that.
We can definitely do that. Yeah, I think it would be, I would agree that I think we can say with some confidence that the two projects that have gone through would be compliant with this. But it will be, I think it would be worth the test to take it through and see what happens. In other words, to just sort of as an academic
As a scoring,
exercise,
yeah,
score it
I would
and
like
see what
for us to
see
do
what's
that, yeah, to
come
see kind
out.
of where it scores.
Yeah. We certainly have enough information and more to do that, so, yeah, that would be a good thing. It's also important to calibrate it anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
Just to follow up on what Commissioner Hoppick said, you know, we talked about the development agreement and those negotiations are being the next step. At what point do we bring in the other taxing entities to either, you know, to get their blessing or to have them decline? Because I attended the presentation at the County Commission last week, and thank you both for doing that and for bringing them in the loop. But my question is, you know, how much time do we put in before we get some sort of provisional, you know, thumbs up or thumbs down? Do we go all the way through the negotiation and the development agreement before we hand the package to the County Commission and USD 305?
My takeaway from the county conversation in particular was their desire to be involved early. I mean,
Yeah, that was the
technically,
same takeaway.
procedurally, we could, it'd be a gamble and it would not be very collaborative, but we could go through that whole process and just mail them notice and wait for the reaction. But the conversation we had at the county commission meeting was not, they seemed receptive. They at least were appreciative of the quandary that we find ourselves in. The county administrator in particular indicated a desire that we continue to collaborate, and that'd be my intention is, as we talk about the development agreement, keep them informed, keep them involved so that we're not at the tail end and then
Exactly.
hearing concerns that we
Exactly.
need to double
Okay.
back and
That was
address.
that was the kind of reassurance that I was looking for. And my final question, and I'm sorry if I'm monopolizing the time here. I'll try to keep it quick. At what point do we establish a relationship with the Kansas Housing Resources Commission? I think Marty's probably perfectly placed to speak to that, because I don't know if it's you specifically or your firm is doing.
Or it's doing the state.
That's doing the
plan.
state
Yeah.
strategic plan and working with Chodo and working with the city. You know, at what point do we bring them into these discussions and, you know, and enlist them to help us match the best incentive with the project that we have, or, you know, to get their input on some
I
projects?
think actually this would probably be a good time. Lauren has been at one of the listening sessions. That's kind of where the state planning process is at right now. So there are all these various inputs and common themes that will be coming in.
I guess just to let you know, Mayor, what we have been doing with KHRC, because we've spent a lot of time, both the Economic Development Organization, Chamber, and the city, over the last couple of months, talking to KHRC about our problems. I mean, they're the ones who introduced us to Manufactured Home Owners Association,
Right.
and talking with them about productivity. We've been talking about with Department of Commerce. Lieutenant Governor, and the Executive Director of Kansas Housing Resource Corporation about our needs. In fact, we suggested they have a spotlight on their monthly developer call. Eric and I presented on that last week. We were their first initial community to do so. I just talked with Alyssa from Housing Development on Friday just about where we're at with LIHTC applications, a couple of programs that had come through that maybe aren't a typical private sector developer, but were a combination of nonprofits with the private sector saying, you know, the way I'm reading this, I see this and this could apply. Are you seeing that the same way? Yes, no. So we do have that relationship with KHRC and talk with them quite regularly.
No, then that's good to hear. And I know that we've discussed in the past that possibly the work that Marty has done for the Live Salina could supplement like the housing assessment tool that they have
Yeah.
for communities. But I also know that they have regularly scheduled meetings for communities to come in and say, here are projects, what aligns best with our needs. And I would just hate for us not to utilize a resource, a common resource that we're all trying to work toward the same thing. So
Yeah.
I would just encourage us to
Yeah.
to build that relationship as strong as we can.
I think we will also probably generate some ideas for state legislation out of this
Fantastic.
too. That there are some gaps that are, I think, highly desirable in the RHIDs and a couple of other things that should not really be that controversial, but they're not fundable right now.
And all of our city entities attended the state regional program for the meeting for the housing plan. And then I know that I was in the regional meeting for government officials speaking to housing. So we've been active in the state's planning efforts for the new housing plan. And even through the ESG program, we work quite often on the other side of KHRC, which is more housing or homelessness and emergency support for those types of things. So I think we've got both sides of those covered. When I reached out following the strategic planning where we talked about those resources, was gently nudged to say, yes, of course you could use those, but they're typically for smaller cities who don't have as much staff or availability of consultants. But their response was typically, if you don't have something you feel you've got the right resources for, we're always here for you.
That's so good to know. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? All right.
No, just one comment. I thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of the patience and in my experience, I've never been in a community that's cared so much about housing and wanted to get so deeply and intimately involved in it. So I appreciate you as a consultant, you really hope to have a great client, and that makes you better too. And you guys have been great, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Marty. Appreciate your time, and we'll take a quick break for the meeting at 4.